just going to share a little bit of context about how this program came into fruition. So Morgan, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Sarah, and welcome everyone. Again, I'm Morgan Hind. I'm the director of the Bingham program. And we're here today to learn more about aging and ageism and the impact on really all of the work that we do. The Bingham program has been a longtime supporter of the Maine Council on Aging, including their work with the Tri-State Learning Collaborative on Aging, and we support ongoing their really excellent advocacy work and some other projects that they're doing in communities all over the state. And I, along with my colleagues Laura Lee from Maine Community Foundation and Ruta Kadenoff from the Maine Health Access Foundation, I've had a number of conversations with Jess Maurer from the Maine Council on Aging about how aging in Maine really does touch on every other issue area that foundations are funding in. And a lot of folks in philanthropy don't naturally see the connections, but they are definitely there. So this felt like an important opportunity to explore where those connections are, work that some of you might already be funding that connects with aging and you don't even realize. There are just so many important connections to be made. One in particular that we've talked about recently was workforce as a major issue in Maine. I'm sure this is sort of the lighter end of things, but I'm sure many of you have probably tried to go out to dinner back when, before Delta or maybe even, outside eating, and restaurants can't find people to work. And that's just one area of workforce shortage. And, there's a lot of work that's been done about how important older people are to the workforce in Maine. And that's another important issue for us to explore. I think Jess will probably touch on. So, along with my colleagues, we really wanted to bring folks together to explore this together and help everyone understand the connections. So welcome. And I think, Sarah, I'm not sure who's taking over from here, so I'll pass it back to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Morgan. And now I'd just like to turn it over to Jess Maurer and Lindsay Goldman. Jess is from the Maine Council on Aging, and Lindsay is from the Grantmakers in Aging, and we'll also be joined by Laura Lee from the Maine Community Foundation a little bit later. So I'm going to turn it over to Jess first. And Jess, if you want to give a little bit of background about yourself, you are more than welcome.
All right, that didn't work so well. I already started talking. You weren't there because I was muted. All right, so I'm going to try again. Can't do two things at once to share my screen. So greetings and thank you all for joining us today for this important conversation. And I am Jess Maurer. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Council on Aging, and we are a broad multidisciplinary network of more than 100 organizations, businesses, municipalities, and older people who are working collectively to make sure we can all live healthy and engaged, secure lives as we age in our homes and communities. And I am trying to change my settings, but it's not letting me, so I apologize for having you see both of these, but I can't get the. I can't change it right now. I'm sorry about that, but we'll just go with it. Okay, good. So our question today, and I really thank you all for coming and for hosting this conversation, is can we build a more equitable and inclusive Maine with healthier people and communities and a stronger economy by intentionally addressing age bias in all its form? We at the Maine Council on Aging have, this is part of a conversation that we're hosting through our Power in Aging project, which is founded by the Maine Community Foundation. And before 2020, I think it's very important for me to say With the Maine Council on Aging, and we've been around since 2012, so we'll be 10 years old next year. We're not addressing ageism directly, and it's really that COVID hit us over the head with a clear message about overt ageism and its impact on older people in this country and in actually globally, and that we needed to stop doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And that's really specifically related to not addressing the root cause ageism for some of the hesitancy of systemic change. So we've got a pretty basic formula in this conversation, and it's really that ageism is bad for us, it's bad for our economy, that awareness of age bias reduces people's desire to act on ageism, and that conversations about age bias actually will reduce people acting on age bias and also will increase support for the systemic change that we need. Another thing that happened in 2020 was that Kathy Greenlee was our keynote speaker for our Wisdom Summit, our annual Wisdom Summit, which we'll tell you about later on too. It's coming right up. And she's the former director for the Administration of Community Living under the Obama administration. And she said a couple of things. One, it's really time to stop disaggregating people who span 50 years. When we start talking about older people, we just lump everybody into one category, and that can be 50 and older or 60 and older, and that we're talking about an awful lot of people. And the other is that we really need to start showing up as our age. And that's something that has resonated with us and something that we've started encouraging people to do as they begin having conversations about ageism. So it's important to just take a quick look at Maine's demographic as we're having this conversation to really think about disaggregating numbers. And as you see, and I think people are often shocked about this, but that 54% of Maine's adult population is over the age of 50. And so, you know, when we start talking about seniors, if we're talking about the AARP definition of seniors, which is 50 and older, we're talking about more than half of the population, adult population of Maine. But really also thinking about, if you look at the 50 and 50 to 70 year olds, their experience related to aging and ageism is very different than people who are in their 70s and 80s. People who are experiencing age bias or challenges related to aging in their 50s are more likely to be experiencing challenges with employment, to be thinking about, you know, do I have to still dye my hair? Do I have to change my resume? And this is all real stuff. Should I not put my date of graduation? Should I change the number of years I've worked in an organization so that I can get a job? As opposed to somebody who's in their 80s, who is most likely struggling with issues of transportation, needing support, and potentially needing alternative housing, simply because our needs change as we grow significantly older. And so we've really taken this to heart that we need to personally, as an organization, start disaggregating Maine's older population when we talk about it, but also asking other folks to do the same. And so with our new awareness, we have really started talking about this ageism thing in January. And so we were super excited when the World Health Organization followed our lead and issued a report on global report on ageism in March. So we like to take credit with, you know, sort of being first, although they, of course, were doing the work. But really, the Global Report on Ageism helps us understand how pervasive ageism is, and it underscores the need to address ageism directly. So before we go any further, I would like to ask you all to just chat in what some words or phrases that come to your mind when you think about ageism and its impact. So you can use the chat and you can chat in as many words as you like, but I'm just curious what you think about it, because a lot of folks have different ideas about what ageism is and what it isn't. That's all good. That's right, us versus them, counting people out, negative stereotypes. Missed opportunities, I like that a lot. Making assumptions, devaluing, lack of representation. This is all great. Thanks for that. And elder abuse, Sarah, thanks for adding that. And that's definitely a significant and serious outcome of ageism is abuse in later life. So one of the, thank you for sharing your thoughts. One of the really great things that is happening through this Power and Aging project is that we are creating a leadership exchange on ageism, and we're working with some wonderful folks who have been thought leaders around issues of racism and homophobia and gender inequality. And so we have designed this document. And again, if I could figure out how to expand it, you could see it bigger, but I think we've shared it with you, which really talks about how ageism works, just like racism and sexism. It's pervasive in the systems around us. It's really like the air we breathe. We don't really notice it, but we're breathing it in all the time. And it really comes from cultural messages that we're bombarded with every day, idealizing youth and dismissing or making fun of older people. And you know, this is every birthday card for anybody over the age of 50 that you've ever received or sent. And it is a normal, it's a social norm that we make fun of getting older. Resources, it's the choice our society makes about the distribution of things that people need to survive. And I think you will all agree that distribution of resources for older people is often inadequate and unfair. And then there are these social norms, the institutional policies that marginalize or exclude or discriminate against older people. And that leads to the part in the middle, which is, you know, our interactions among people, institutions, our internalized ageism, which, by the way, is often one of the most harmful things, is our own thinking about our own aging and older people. And it really does tend to keep us in, and us and them, one of you said in response to the question I asked, us and them, our own internalized thinking about aging always keeps somebody who's older as the older person. There's always somebody older than me, and so I'm not old is often a message that we have. So we'll share this document with you, but we think it's really very helpful to sort of understand the big picture of how ageism acts. And so then, of course, the question is, why do we have this conversation at all? And that the answer is ageism is bad for us. It's really bad for us. In the workplace, it leads to personal economic challenges, which means that if I can't get a job when I lose one when I'm 55 because somebody thinks I'm not on the cutting edge and they need to replace me by somebody younger and I can't get more income, or if I have to take time off to take care of my aging parents and I lose my Social Security payments and I don't put into my retirement account, these things all result in worse economic status later in life. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But it also ageism puts constraints on our community roles. In healthcare, it has resulted in poor health outcomes for older people, and that's very well demonstrated. Obviously, the cultural model, as I have just mentioned, diminishes the value of older lives. And more importantly, and I've already mentioned again, in policy, it leads to less support for the need for systemic change. And then I really like to make sure that everybody understands, if you didn't see it, you know, this is what we were up against last year, and we're still up against it now, which is this overt ageism that said very clearly that some people in this country thought that older lives meant less than younger lives. And this is not something that just happened well, it happened worldwide, but just not in our nation. In the Bangor Daily News, constantly in relation to articles about older people dying, there were references to the boomer remover, COVID being the boomer remover, and finally being able to get ahead and get these old people out of the way. And a Westbrook City councilor actually wrote on a Facebook page saying, we shouldn't be counting the deaths of older people in facilities because they're just waiting to die. And so, these are the messages that older people got over the last 16 months. And we really don't know how these sorts of messages are going to impact us all as we move forward in thinking about our own aging process. Thanks to Morgan, she raised the issue of discrimination in employment, and several of you also mentioned that. So I just offered these screens. I'm not going to go through them, but these are a few screens we included in our conversations that we're now having with human resources directors around Maine. And we just got a chance to present to about 40 HR directors through the Diversity in Hiring Coalition in Maine. And talked about this. I mean, we have known, right, that this workforce gap was coming for a long time. And we've actually, this is a slide directly from the Department of Labor in Maine. We've known what this workforce gap is going to be for more than a decade. And then, here we are in 2013, where the Making Maine Work report came out. And this is the Maine Development Foundation in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce that said, we know this workforce challenge is going to come, and we've got some solutions. We hear the 5 groups of people that we think we need to be focusing on to really make sure that we have a robust workforce moving forward. And of these groups, seniors, which I would never use that word, may provide the greatest opportunities. And they actually put, a goal to add 12,000 more workers. This was 65 and older people who were not currently employed. And as you'll see, they just said, if we just engaged older workers at a rate that New Hampshire would, we put 12,000 people more to work, 12,000 more people to work, which at the time was the goal of the amount of people we needed. The reality is that nothing happened. And we worked hard. We met with Yellow Light Green. We met with Dana Connors. We met with all kinds of people saying, how are we going to implement this recommendation? And they said, well, we just make these reports. We don't implement. These are just, this is helping business to know what to do. But really, the question then becomes, if we have no leader who is talking about the importance of older people in joining our workforce and continuing to make our economy more robust, it's not going to happen because we have these internalized beliefs about older workers. And this is where I get to tell you the stories about what happened, right? So we had this great conversation with these 40 HR directors, and then we went on to some breakout rooms and we talked about, how does this kind of stuff show up in your workplace? And we thought we would kind of get to the stereotypes and the bias that we hold about older people and technology. And what we heard was illegal discrimination. I mean, people intentionally not hiring people because they believed that they couldn't keep up or they couldn't address the technology issues. And this one HR director of a bank said, yeah, oh yes, the vice president passes over older candidates all the time. But then we hired one, and this other person with a disability, we hired an older person, a person with disability, and we slowed the training down, and we, accommodated all these needs, and we really were careful in how we onboarded them, but it took a lot of time. And so I don't think he'll do that again. And, my response was, don't you think all of your employees would benefit from getting that kind of an onboarding process? And, who knows if it was even necessary, like the stereotype of this older person coming in as a worker in a bank, not being able to keep up was quite something. And we're also having conversations with news media. And so we had a conversation just a couple of weeks ago with the news director of WMTW, and this workforce issue came up, and she said, yeah, but older workers are so much more expensive. I can't afford them, which was terrific because, here's another stereotype. And we got to talk about, well, actually the best practice is to publish your salary range, and then everybody knows what their salary range is, and you'll get candidates who think that that's an appropriate salary range for them, and you're making assumptions about what people need to earn. They may have worked an entire career and are ready to do something totally different, and you're counting them out by not even offering them an interview because you think that they're going to be too expensive. So this is very pervasive, and we think if we can address these issues, we'll actually be able to address some of our pervasive workforce shortages in the coming years. So the last piece, well, I guess not quite the last piece, but I think Laura and Lindsay may talk about this more. I just want to say, first of all, thank you to national funders and to Maine funders and to the Endowment for Health in New Hampshire for funding Reframing Aging, because it has been a godsend for us. This is a national effort that really did, from Frameworks Institute, that did an extensive empirical research on how Americans think and feel about aging and older people. And, we've been able to really take these recommendations. I'm not going to go through them, but, it's this idea that, and I knew it would be true because I've just talked to so many people, that either older people are great and they're out on their yacht and golfing, or they're nearly dead, and that ageism doesn't really exist. And if it does, it's not as bad as homophobia or racism. And that really, this is something I hear all the time from the legislature. It's an individual's problem. If they only worked harder, and in my generation, people took care of their families, really marginalizing this idea that there are systemic problems that are underlying, right? And none of us can individually solve our workforce shortage. None of us can solve public transportation in Maine. These are systemic issues, but we look to the individual as the cause of the problem and move, which keeps us from moving to working collaboratively on the problem. And I just included this because, the language does matter. And I like to include this slide when we talk about using older people as the least offensive, by the way, and I will call it the least offensive description of older people, that Americans see the word senior and elder and senior citizen as the oldest and least competent among us. But when you ask older people, and we have often, what would you want to be called in the last third of your life? The answer is none of these. So we don't really know, but we think we're going to have to come up with some new words. But I like to share this slide because it helps people connect. When you talk about a senior, the 70-year-old you're talking to, you think you're telling that 70-year-old something about something that's available for seniors, and they're thinking about their 90-year-old mom. And it just is the way things go these days in Maine. So finally, just want to talk about, the fact that conversations work. These conversations we've been having lead to almost instantaneous reflection and often lead to action. And so, this editorial Greg Kresich wrote 3 days after we had a conversation with him, when he asked about the COVID questions about, our grandparents would be happy to die to open the economy. He asked, is that true? You think most people hold that belief? And I said, well, I've been in rooms so many times when I've asked people to describe their perfect community to age in, and they'll tell me everything that's beautiful about this community. And then they'll say, and when I can't do for myself anymore, somebody's going to take me behind the barn and shoot me. And I'm like, other people laugh, people laugh about that. And that's our strategy for long-term care. We don't like the option. We don't want to live in a nursing home. We don't like that option, and we don't have another option. So, if we don't like other people living in nursing homes and we'd rather die, then we probably don't value those folks because we're not valuing that life. And so he got that immediately and wrote this editorial, which was pretty impactful. So I do just like to say that these conversations matter. I know now you can't read this this slide, but I can't even do that part. I was going to try to, but this is two pieces. One, sort of examples in grant making that I've experienced just this year, which is I was a reviewer for some arts grants. And one of the requirements was that the participants gain some sort of mastery of the technique. And so I was saying, well, I don't know about this one. It didn't seem like they would get mastery of the program. And one of the other reviewers said, literally, what can a person over 65 master anyway? And, I called her on it. Nobody else did. And, this just sort of gets to the commonly held belief. This other question here is from an foundation eligibility quiz, where they're talking about anti-oppression values and list out really every form of oppression that you could think of except ageism. And so sometimes it's about what are we missing when we're thinking about grant making and being inclusive. And just, sort of a few last comments, which one is intention matters. I like to say all the time, we've got 11,500 babies born every year in Maine, and every child matters because it's such a few number of children. They have to grow up healthy and ready to take the jobs of Maine's future. And we have to be really intentional about this. And we are usually, but 24,000 people are turning 65 every year. And these folks should be living their most purposeful life, working, creating, mentoring, governing, and we have to be intentional about this as well. And so I just say Maine has got this tremendous opportunity to align its investments, to stop thinking about yellow buses and elementary schools and start talking about, centers for lifelong learning and health that help everyone, every age, in an entire community. To buy, minivans that can be used to take kids to school and can be used in a community for transportation purposes, to really shift our thinking about housing and workforce. We've got a lot of solutions, but we really have to be intentional about it. And then without intention, I just ask the question, what are we losing? And so this is, we're doing a data project funded by the Bingham and MEHAF. That's really taking a deep dive in data related to the needs of older people in a few communities, including Gray. And so I just point this out. It's one of the pieces that was really shocking to us, that Gray seems to have lost its 80-year-olds. The state average percentage of people who are 80 and older is 4.8. And theirs is 1.3. And so we are asking the question, what does this community look like that it's not a viable solution for people in their 80s? And then I tell this story from my own community about Bob, who is a retired nuclear engineer who kept us safe from nuclear power for his entire career, both in private sector and in the military. And his one mission in life when he retired was to create a home repair initiative that would help older people in his community. And I helped him do that here in Harpswell. And they've repaired over 100 homes over the last few years and have saved lives, demonstrated to save lives. But he's 80. He's actually 81 now. That picture is when he's 80. And he has a neurological genetic disease. He and his brother both have it. And it's, gotten a little bit worse as he's aged, and he falls. And so his home didn't work for him anymore in Harpswell. And he and his wife, and she was also just an amazing volunteer. She ran our communications efforts here at Harpswell Aging Home. They could not find a home that worked for them in Harpswell. They couldn't find a university, a single story home on a small parcel of land. And they love this community so much, and they had to leave because they couldn't find what they needed here. And, I know this is one person, one example, but the reality is we haven't built what's next for us, for all of us to be able to age in our communities, to stay in our communities. And intention is the thing that's going to fix that. When we start to intentionally say, how do we design our communities to work for everybody, then we'll finally get there. And I've just dropped this last slide in here, and this, is to say intersectionality is really important, and historical bias also really important. Another data piece that we're looking at is the distinction between older men and older women who are living alone in Maine. And older women are 2 times as likely to live alone in older life than men are. So there are 50,000 older people, 65 and older, who are women, and only about 24,000 who are men. And they have, of course, women have less income. And you'll see over here in the state piece, 22,000 versus 27,000. 22,000 is the median income, and the half of the older women who are living on 22,000 or less don't have enough money to meet their basic needs. And many of them don't qualify for any means tested benefits. So it is important to begin to disaggregate data and to look deeper, to look at intersectionality and historical bias. So now I'm going to turn things over to Lindsay. I think I just took my 20 minutes, hopefully. I'm going to turn things over to Lindsay and Laura Lee, but just want to say I can, and Laura knows I can, it doesn't matter what you're funding, that you can intentionally include older people and the needs of older people without shifting your mission and priority. And they're going to, I think, talk more about that. So thanks so much.
Can everyone hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Fabulous. All right. So if you could just pull up my slides, that would be great. Hi, I'm Lindsay Goldman. I am the CEO of Grantmakers in Aging. I have been in that role since January. So I have had the privilege of starting a new job from my bedroom with my entire family, very nearby. So I apologize for any noise you might hear coming from my house today. I have been aging in the field of aging for about 20 years. I am trained as a social worker. I started in direct service, moved into philanthropy. For the last 8 years, I worked in aging policy, focused on the age-friendly communities movement in New York City and New York State. And now I'm back in philanthropy, working for a philanthropy serving organization. We serve as a network, resource, and champion for aging and aging investments. And our goals are to promote collaboration, to maximize impact, to provide information, ideas, and strategies, and maybe most importantly, and why I'm here today, to really mobilize support and funding and action to improve the quality of life as we all age. Thank you to Laura Lee, who serves on our board and who invited me to speak here today. Minimize a little bubble. Okay. Grantmakers in Aging has been around for about 40 years, and about 10% of our members are very large national funders, but the majority are smaller, regional, more local funders. And we've recently extended eligibility for membership to public sector funders because I am an admitted public-private partnership evangelist. And I really believe that we can only be most effective when we expand our tent as large as possible. Oh, I'm sorry, next slide. Okay, and next slide. So this is about all of us. Reframing Aging is something that we really believe in. It emerged from a large funders collaborative of GIA members. And it's all about, changing the way that we talk about aging, shifting from, them and those older people to, this is about us. It's about all of us. And so just as, we've come to accept the social determinants of health, there are also really consequential social determinants of aging. Next slide. And because this is about all of us, we should all take offense at how the public health victory of population aging has been framed in public discourse. A large aging population is seen as a drain on public services and resources. We use all kinds of inappropriate weather analogies to describe the population shift. And it's really problematic because, it's hard to get people to pay attention to your work when you work in aging. And, you know, the worst thing would be when an initiative that I had worked so hard on had finally gotten some press and we had a real success story to tell to our funders and policymakers. And then we couldn't use the story to promote our work because there'd be some flagrant display of ageism in an otherwise great story. So it's very pervasive. Next slide. And we have a few blind spots. We don't include older people when addressing problems. We don't consider older people when thinking about solutions. We all suffer from implicit and sometimes explicit ageism and bias. Our systems and structures were designed for a much shorter lifespan, and people don't have equal opportunities to age well. And this is true throughout society, but it's also true in philanthropy. Next slide. So as Jess explained, we need to reconsider our assumptions about older people. Ageism is bad, not just for individuals, leading to negative physical and mental health outcomes, but it's also bad for society, right? It creates increased healthcare expenditures and weakened social fabric and unmet needs. So this is something that we all need to be concerned about. Next slide. And when we think about it this way, anti-ageism interventions are really public health interventions. Sorry, back to the previous slide. So the good news is that even though ageism is rampant, there is evidence that it's a modifiable risk factor. So there was one recent systematic review of the effectiveness of anti-ageism interventions across age groups. And what they found was that interventions that provide education, similar to the Reframing Aging model, right? But also exposure to aging are effective in changing the attitudes, knowledge, and comfort level that people have about older people and that older people have about themselves, right? So education, raising awareness that ageism exists, that is effective, as Jeff said. And the truth is, once you see it, you can't unsee it, and you start to see it everywhere. And then exposure can take many forms. But what studies have shown is that intergenerational contact is essential in breaking down some of those stereotypes and barriers between people. And so that exposure can take different forms. We often only consider the most traditional types of exposure, right? So the traditional, little kids go and visit a nursing home and we all feel warm and fuzzy. But really, exposure takes many forms and many different kinds of interventions, right? So you can promote intergenerational contact through the built environment, through housing policy, through social policies, through zoning. It's all about creating opportunities for connection, greater engagement, and ultimately more resilient communities. So the idea of intergenerational connection is much larger than just, the preschool visiting the nursing home. Okay, now next slide. So there are many opportunities for growth, even within aging philanthropy. And in fact, one of the target audiences for the Reframing Aging work was the Aging Services Network, because we are not immune from that bias that we all have. And I find that there's a lot of room for improvement in the way that those of us who work in aging speak about our work. So it is true that there are very few national and even local funders that focus exclusively on older people. And the party line has been only 1 to 2% of private philanthropy goes towards older adults. And in fact, there is some truth to that 1 to 2%, right? But I'm going to argue that in many ways, that's actually an ageist statistic and a very narrow view of what constitutes aging philanthropy. Aging philanthropy is also rooted in a deficits-oriented narrative. Funding has been seen primarily as charity, with older people as vulnerable, needy recipients of service. It's been focused on serving the most frail and providing really critical support. And I come out of the aging services world, right? So I don't want to diminish the value of those services like home delivered meals and case management and transportation to medical appointments. These services are absolutely needed. They're most definitely underfunded, but that's not the full story. And there has to be more to life as we age than going to the doctor and a biannual visit from a social worker. I'm a social worker, so I can say that. Next slide. But also older people have resources that communities need: social, intellectual, and significant financial capital. So it's in all of our best interests to keep them as active and engaged as possible. So my job is to be that aging evangelist. And I can tell you that the most frustrating thing that I hear is, when I try to talk to people about why, they might consider investing in aging and why, GIA membership is important to mobilize support for aging. And I hear some variety of aging's not our thing, right? So it comes in different forms. Most often it's, we don't do aging, we do, and whatever issue you want to insert there, I can tell you exactly how you do aging. So we don't do aging, we do transportation. We don't do aging, we do climate change. We don't do aging, we do youth, right? It's just a matter of people not recognizing the aging angle of every investment. I also hear we have new priorities and we're no longer focused on aging. Why? Did people stop aging? No, people are still aging. So even if it's not a target population, there are still ways you can optimize all of your other investments, however you think about them, to benefit the largest number of people. And the most recent one I started hearing is, oh, we're focused on equity. We're not focused on aging. That's a problem. Because aging needs to be part of conversations about equity, because ageism is rampant and older people have been disenfranchised in many ways. And equity must be part of conversations about aging because we don't all have equal access to resources that are required to age well. And finally, people don't live in the same silos that we fund. People live in multi-generational households and communities. And so our funding needs to be aligned with the reality of how people live. Next slide. So what can we do? Well, first, we need to start looking at aging philanthropy as investment, just the way that we think about investing in children, investing in our environment, investing in healthy communities. We need to invest in aging. And if we truly want to optimize our philanthropy, we need to look at all investments as aging investments. We talk about health in all policies. I'm talking about age in all philanthropy. And today I'm going to tell you exactly what that looks like when you apply an aging lens to different types of investments. I will not be sharing a nationally representative sample. I am concentrated on New York examples, basically because I'm in New York and I haven't really been able to leave New York for the last year and a half. But that's not to say that fabulous things are not happening throughout the country. Next slide. So this is Hank. He's my father-in-law. And until recently, he worked part-time as an optometrist. He's 88 and he lives in Manhattan, but he had to take the train to the Bronx where he worked. He was an optometrist. and he had to walk from his apartment to the subway. And on that route, there were 2 benches. These were benches that had been strategically placed and designed to make his community more walkable and to, help people connect, finding themselves on, the same bench around the same time of day, increasing the social capital and social connections of the neighborhood. And so Hank credits those 2 benches with enabling him to work for 2 additional years, because he had COPD and he needed to stop and take a rest before he could navigate the stairs, because of course the subway station was not accessible. And he needed to stop and take a rest. And so because he was able to do that, he was able to remain employed, intellectually challenged, socially connected, physically active, and financially secure for 2 additional years, right? And so we think, he's just one guy, but think about it as on a population level. The funding for those benches, that wasn't aging funding, that was transportation funding. But we looked at the funding opportunity and we said, what do we need to do if we're going to increase public seating, which ultimately influences public health? How are we going to design those benches? Well, let's put, special armrests to ease people getting up and down, right? Let's look at the material. Let's look at, how people plan to use the bench and what direction should it be facing, right? Little considerations. It's that intentionality that Jess mentioned that ultimately made this a successful endeavor for my father-in-law and for many other people who have benefited from the bench. Next slide. Just mentioned the workforce shortage. There is a tremendous workforce shortage nationwide. The health and human services workforce is aging. What's great is when we can look at the aging lens and see win-win solutions. So this is an initiative called the Geriatrics Career Development Program. It's housed in a nursing home where they have a program to place kids from under-resourced neighborhoods and low-performing schools in jobs in the nursing home, exposing those kids to older people, to careers in healthcare. And these kids are being certified as home health attendants while going to high school, and their outcomes are so impressive. And they're tracking outcomes related to the impact that the kids are having on the older people, but also, the impact that the experience is having for those kids, right? So they're looking at graduation rates. They're looking at people going to med school, people enrolling in PhD programs. And they're really serving 2 purposes, right? This is not aging funding. This is education and workforce funding. It's also another example of a really successful public-private partnership. But the money comes from the New York State Department of Education, about 25% of it. They don't consider themselves aging funders, but they're funding aging. Next slide. Similarly, when we look at funders of children and families, if we expand our view of one that positions older people as, exclusively needy, but rather older people as agents of social change, just the way that we consider younger people as agents of social change, we benefit people of all ages. So one of our members, the Eisner Foundation, recently launched a grandfather reading buddies program, and it recruits retired men and retired police officers specifically to help young boys of color ages 5 to 9 in South Los Angeles. I started my career working for Big Brothers Big Sisters of New York City. And our most successful matches, right, it's a one-to-one mentoring program, our most successful matches were between kids and older people. We all have something to offer. Next slide. When we apply the aging lens to economic development, so this is funding, and there's a lot of it, that is focused on stimulating local economies, bringing jobs to neighborhoods, making communities more walkable, increasing social connection, increasing physical activity. So in New York, we have a downtown revitalization initiative. And that's the primary procurement for economic development in New York State. It's about $200 million just in 2021. It's an annual program. And what we did was we changed the criteria for downtown revitalization funding. We changed the RFP, and we said that anyone who's applying for this economic development funding had to say how their initiative would improve the quality of life of people of all ages, how it would promote age-friendly policies. And not only did we change the criteria, we changed the scoring. So there were weights attached for people who presented a really compelling strategy for ensuring that these economic development dollars were going to benefit the largest number of people. We didn't design our communities for such a long lifespan because we didn't have to, but now we do. And so if we're investing in downtown revitalization, we need to ensure that people of all ages, current and future older people, can actually participate in civic life downtown. Next slide. For funders of arts and culture, older people must be seen as producers and consumers of arts and culture. And this is not out of a sense of altruism, but there is a business case for it, right? Older people spend more than $5 trillion a year. That's 5 times the amount spent by millennials. People 65 to 74 spend more on entertainment than any other age group. Movies are made for boys 18 to 24, but the people who are really at the movies are older. So all arts and cultural institutions, even the most popular ones, have to continually work to grow and maintain their audiences while addressing increasing competition from new media and many forms of entertainment in order to meet their business objectives, right? So this makes business sense. And what's great is that the program people, this is a quote from someone from the Nostrand Avenue Merchants Association. So this is a person who certainly does not identify as a social worker or as, you know, an aging services provider, but she's recognizing that hosting arts events with older adults inspires community relationships while highlighting local businesses and honoring elders. She's concerned with the local businesses, and she's seeing older people as a resource for those local businesses. So the good news is that the program people are starting to see themselves as being in the aging business. But I don't know that the funders are starting to see themselves as aging funders just yet. Next slide. When we apply the aging lens to our grant making, right, to the craft that we're all engaged in, we see older people as decision makers. And we really leverage their lived experience, their knowledge, their dedication to their neighborhoods by sharing the power. And so one community foundation in Brooklyn recently came into a new $10 million fund, the Brooklyn Elders Fund. And they convened a group of older people to serve as the Elders Fund Advisory Council. This group works hand in hand with the program officers to review grant proposals, to conduct site visits, and ultimately to recommend which organizations would receive funding. This is a funder who truly sees older people as assets to philanthropy and, more importantly, to their communities. Next slide. And this is the opposite of what we have here, which is a game that my 10-year-old daughter let me know about, having seen this commercial on TV about a year ago, right? This is a game called Greedy Granny. And the objective here is to steal Granny's cookies while she sleeps. If you don't successfully steal the cookies, her dentures fly out of her mouth, right? If we could watch the clip, very short. I just see me.
New from Tommy, Greedy Granny. Steal her biscuits, but don't wake her up. One false move is all it takes. They've woken Granny, and there go her teeth. New Greedy Granny, only from Tommy.
So this is really revolting, and it plays into stereotypes of older people as useless, as incompetent. She's greedy, she's hoarding all the cookies, she's taking all the resources. It pits older people against younger people. At its worst, it promotes financial abuse and blatant disrespect. But I will end on a positive note, which is that when my 10-year-old daughter told me about the commercial, she and her friend called the toy company to complain. And this gives me faith that we are aware that this is an issue and we are not going to let it continue. And so I'm going to read you the script that my daughter used when she called the toy company. She says, "My name is Sabrina B, and this is my friend Theodore K. And we think that your Greedy Granny commercial is ageist because it is not being nice to older people. One reason is because not all older people have dentures. Some people do though, and it might make them sad and or embarrassed because some people can't afford good dentistry, so they have to wear dentures. Another reason why we think it is ageist is because it encourages children to steal from older people. The third reason why we think it is ageist is because it is mean to say that all older people do is sleep on a chair all day. The fourth reason why it is ageist is because the word greedy is not a nice word." And then in parentheses, she wrote, "Let them talk." So at least she gave them an opportunity to respond. And then they said, "Thank you for your time. We will not buy your game. Please improve it." And so if we can raise enough of these anti-ageist crusaders, we can change the market for this kind of product. So those are the end of my slides. Actually, I have one more, and that is to plug the Grantmakers in Aging annual conference, which is fully virtual. I am hoping for the last year. And you can find many more examples and resources on the Grantmakers in Aging website, giaging.org. We have a funder's guide that you can access there. And please stay in touch. Moving ahead, we can all find new and innovative ways to collaborate, to create partnerships that not only benefit the growing number of older people, but that really create communities that are better for people of all ages. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Laura, would you want to speak for a few moments about kind of Maine Community Foundation and your experience, and then we'll turn it open it up to some questions and answers.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jess and Lindsay and the Maine Philanthropy Center. I will try to be brief. I did write down some notes and realized, gosh, I actually do have a lot to share, but I'll try to just give you a brief overview of my experience at the Maine Community Foundation over the last 5 years, leading our work in the aging area. I came to the Community Foundation in, I guess, 6.5 years ago. I'm currently the director of grantmaking. And 5 years ago, we had a new president, and we went around having community conversations. And, because of the many different issues that were raised in those conversations and the demographic data, aging and older people was identified as one of 5 new sort of strategic initiative areas that we were putting more intention around. And I was assigned to aging and knew really nothing about the field. And so I've had a very steep learning curve, but it's been wonderful. And we took a field building approach, which meant that in the beginning, I really just spent time learning and having many conversations with people in the field, including people like Jess. And, one comment that really struck me was that many people were feeling like ageism was a barrier for them and their work. The way that it was expressed to me then was that they felt that the people they were serving, older adults, were less valued, and that therefore their work with them was receiving less support and funding. So that was sort of just how they were really experiencing that ageism through lack of support and funding. At the same time, as part of my learning, I attended the Grantmakers in Aging annual conference in the fall of 2016 in Portland, Oregon, where I got to hear Nat Kendall Taylor, who is the president of the Frameworks Institute, share that research that was new at the time, that both Jess and Lindsay have mentioned. Just to go back, like, that research was commissioned by a group of leading national aging organizations, including GIA, because they felt that their messages were not getting through and something was really preventing them from being effective in their work. And so, based on what I heard at that conference and the sort of what I was learning in my conversations, I just realized the research that they had done was so important and was going to really be important to bring to Maine. And so the Community Foundation was able to partner with MEHAF and the Bingham program. AARP Maine provided funding through their national office. And we also partnered with a couple of New Hampshire funders, Endowment for Health and New Hampshire Charitable, to include some colleagues in New Hampshire. And we worked for 2 years directly with the Frameworks Institute and had intensive learning and training with about 50 leaders in the aging field and in communities here in Maine. And so it's very exciting that the Maine Council on Aging is, running with this work, and that we're able to support them in the Power in Aging project to really address ageism head on. So that was one really big part of our initiative work, was this Reframing Aging work. And then the other part was supporting so many of these grassroots community initiatives that were really popping up all over the state at the time and continue to, thanks to the work of AARP Maine, which had funding through the John T. Gorman Foundation that was providing planning grants at the time. And as I'm sure many of you know, the Community Foundation has long been focused on strengthening communities through an asset-based community development lens. And so it just was really natural for us to, I think, support work that was aimed at making communities stronger, with that particular focus on older residents and older community members. So we have had a grant program specifically focused on that, but are really trying to incorporate that work now into our ongoing community building grant program. The other thing I learned, over the course of things, was that actually even though aging was new to me, it wasn't completely new to the Community Foundation. And I just wanted to mention that in 2009, the Maine Community Foundation was one of 9 community foundations across the country that participated in the Community Experience Partnership funded by the Atlantic Philanthropies. And that provided planning and implementation funding that was all focused on civic engagement for older people. And it was through that program that we created a really strong partnership with the Center on Aging at the University of Maine, and with them developed what's still called the Encore Leadership Corps, which developed training and a network of older adult volunteers. So with that sort of infrastructure and relationship already in place, it really made sense to sort of continue to invest in that relationship and focus on this, age-friendly and what we're calling lifelong communities work. So with the Center on Aging, we've developed a Lifelong Communities Fellows program, which is we're about to launch the third and final year, which has been providing support and training and networking to older adult volunteers who have successfully led community efforts in their own communities and who are willing to work with other communities who are starting out or experiencing, needing a little help with similar lifelong efforts in their communities. And just recently, the Center on Aging has won an AmeriCorps grant that will be placing lifelong Maine AmeriCorps program members, or LMAP members, into communities to provide even more support than the Lifelong Communities Fellows are able to provide. And there will be fellows who will be paired with these members so that they can take advantage of all the learning that has happened over the past couple of years. So I guess my only thing I want to add at the end here is just to circle back to this question of ageism and philanthropy. And I've been thinking about it, and of course, the most obvious ways I think are, when we are just not including older people in or they're just not being considered in what we're funding. But I think the other way, I guess I'm seeing it is when, and I think Lindsay really touched on this, was only seeing them as vulnerable or in need of relief or sort of charity in that way. And I think that if we only see them in that way, we're really missing older people as this untapped resource who have the energy to drive changes in communities and come up with these innovative ideas. And that's what we've really been seeing with our work with lifelong communities, just amazing work that's being done in communities. And so we've been really, we've just learned so much and have been really honored to be able to support this work. And thank you for listening. And I'm happy to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Laura. And just, I have a whole page full of notes that I've been taking as we've been talking today. It's been great learning for me personally. So I would love to use about 10 minutes for some questions and answers. So if anybody has a question, you can put it in the chat. You can come off of mute and share it yourself. And I also have some questions that I can add if folks don't have any. Okay, I'm going to ask a question while you all think of yours. Something, and I guess this is a question about just like practices that people that are doing this really well use. And what I'm thinking about is just like, how do we make ageism part of an intersectional lens when we're doing our work? I think that slide, Lindsay, that you used was so just like really stuck in my head, because I hear that too with funders and nonprofits that like, oh, that's not my work. How do we get to the place where when we're thinking about equity, we're including all of these marginalized identities? And I was just curious if anybody had any kind of practices, and this is for the presenters or other people in the audience that might have a practice that they use to make sure that they're including age as part of their intersectional lens.
Kim has her hand raised, Sarah.
Thank you, Jess. Yeah, Kim, go ahead.
Thanks, Jess. We listed in our grant applications as one of the areas of equity that we want people to talk about. Also, how any marginalized group is really informing and driving that work, like within their equity lens. So not only wanting to make sure that people are thinking about that as they apply to us and how it impacts their work, but also their leadership and how they're really including those voices in their work that way. So we try and think about, we ask specific questions around age demographics and try and make sure that we capture younger populations, because we're looking at working with girls and women, but also that we're reaching folks over 65, and we sort of look at it like under 18, above 18 to 65, and then over 65 is how we do our age demographics. And we just ask multiple choice questions so people check those boxes off when they're applying, and it helps us with our review of both our LOIs, and then that demographic information also is the cover page of the full proposals that are asked to move forward. And we try and make sure that we're funding, again, in all the different age groups.
Thank you, Kim.
So I think this can be done in different ways. And I've seen a lot of success with both formal and informal mechanisms for embedding age in everything. So in New York State, the governor passed an executive order saying that every state agency had to consider the health and quality of life of older people in their planning, policymaking, and regulation, and procurement, with the procurement piece being the most interesting in a lot of ways for us. And so, you know, now there are counties that are looking to replicate or adapt that executive order at the county level, right? So you embed it in the structures and systems of a community. But the other way that I've had a lot of success is in relationship building and really, you know, leveraging that education evidence that we know works. And if you can infiltrate a state agency or a professional association, and then you get people within that world to be your champion. And so the architects need to hear from other architects, right? The planners need to hear from other planners. They don't want to hear from Lindsay in social work and public health, because that's not what they're about. And so they need people who speak their language. So it's really about selling this concept to really key decision makers and stakeholders, and then having them do the work for us.
Awesome. I love that infiltration. Yeah, Jess, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, just a couple of other thoughts. And particularly, I mean, I think foundations, you know, are doing some incredible work around DEI in their own right, in their own world, and are thinking when you're talking about how to change the culture of an organization. You know, you're having these great conversations and not including something that is part of the law, right? I mean, so I think looking at your non-discrimination policy is a really great place to start, because everybody's non-discrimination policy includes age, and doing a thorough review of an organization's culture, in my mind, you start with, well, what do we say we don't do? You know, I mean, we don't discriminate on these bases, and let's have a conversation about all of them, and then maybe talk about what is it like, you know, is our organization a culture that honors people of all ages? Have we intentionally, I mean, there's a lot of questions that you could do to prompt that. I will say, you know, we're offering these little power bites or power lunches where we've got some power trainers who are willing to come in and talk with folks about these things. And they're really great conversations because, you know, everybody, like I said at the very beginning, everyone has has age bias, everyone, you know, and against younger people and older people. And so it creates this really rich ground for conversation. It just seems to me, and, you know, Ruta and Laura and I talk about sort of like, how do you get to that place where organizations, you know, whether it's foundations or other organizations, want to even have the conversation or know they should have the conversation. That sort of ageist barrier, it makes it very hard to get to the next conversation, which is super fruitful. So that part to me is the challenge.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jess.
I'll just add that I think what's challenging for us, we actually, you know, there are thinking about that participatory grant making example that Lindsay had, you know, we have tons of volunteers and many of them are older, but it's sort of like that. It's a whole nother kind of conversation to have because you can directly talk to people, just like I think one of you mentioned, you know, and talk about people who are older, but no one's identifying themselves in that conversation. And so it's a whole nother conversation to really, you know, get people to think about it for themselves and what it means for themselves, and then actually sort of consciously, intentionally using it in what we're doing. I think is sort of a next level that that we're not at, but I think we certainly have the beginnings in that we do have a lot of people engaged. So it's how to start and have that conversation. Jess will sign you up for that conversation.
I'm actually coming to do some other conversation there soon.
Yes, I know. Well,
yeah.
So, and we'll get information on that too, to make sure to pass out to anybody that's on this call. Any other questions from anybody that's here in the call? And you can just unmute yourself because we're small enough.
It's not a question, but just a comment, something I was thinking about just recently, where when I think about the work that's been happening in many of our organizations around DEI and trying to make our organizations better represent the people of Maine, you know, the people that we're seeking to serve through our grant making. It's interesting because there's like this pendulum swing, right? So MIHAF has definitely been working on diversifying our board, our community advisory committee, our staff, and very intentionally doing that. And when you look at the evolution, what's fascinating is, you know, many philanthropies, MIHAF included, started with a lot of, you know, retired executives and senior executives, you know, in board leadership and governance positions, right? So we started diversifying that group. And just recently, when we looked at our demographics of our board and CAC, I was the one who was struck by the fact that we went down this path of like trying to get younger people on the board. And so we did. And now we have like no older people on the board because we wanted to move away from having it be all, you know, frankly, you know, white retired executives. And so, you know, I raised like, well, maybe we need some greater diversity of the older people that sit on this body as well, and really think about, you know, not swinging back to the initial group, but finding a rich diversity of older people and younger people of all age, you know, people of all ages to serve in those roles. So it's just interesting how that's changed over time.
Such a great point.
Also, in relation to that, I've been working with a woman that runs a land conservation, Southern Maine land conservation organization, and she was saying, you know, most of her board is older, Ruta, like you're saying, but internalized ageism is all focused on youth, and 100% of it. She's like, I can't get them to look at, you know, sort of these other issues about older people accessing land, or about, you know, sort of engaging them in these land conversations. Like, their entire focus is we have to get youth involved. So, you know, it's an interesting challenge all the way around.
Mhm. And we probably have time for one more comment or question. I think the thing that I am walking away with this session is just the idea of intention. Like, I think that that word has actually even been used just so much today. And I think that intention is such a big part of any equity conversation, but really setting that intention, but not just once, like continually coming back to it as you see your patterns shifting, and just building that awareness in your organization. There's a couple of things coming up. So the Maine Council on Aging has a really cool wisdom summit, which is probably the best name of a conference that I've seen in a long time. So we're going to drop the link to that in the chat, and we'll also follow up with that. When are the date? What are the dates for those, Jess? I'm putting you on the spot. I'm sorry, I don't have
It's
them in my
actually
head.
on Tuesday.
It's next week. So
It's on Tuesday next week, but we have some really cool presenters who are talking about these issues. So
awesome. Awesome. And we'll also follow up with all the resources and slide decks from today in an email. But if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to anybody at Maine Philanthropy Center. And I'm sure these presenters too would ask or would answer any questions, or bring you the support that you need. So thank you so much for being here today. We've got a lot of other upcoming programs. So be on the lookout for our newsletter and other messages from Maine Philanthropy Center. But thank you for coming.
thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody.
Okay, Emily, I think we're out. Beautiful.